This is the Voice of Early Childhood podcast. A big hello to all of the listeners. I'm Angelica Slitska, the founder of the Voice of Early Childhood, and I have an exciting announcement for all of you. The full programme for our annual conference is now live, and you can expect to see the following fantastic speakers: Professor Sam Was, Nicola Arkenstall, Joanne Lowe, Olivia Corbin-Phillip, Matt Baller, Cheryl Warren, Dr. K. Aaron Briggs, Lorraine Cara, Wendy Ratcliffe and Jane Coward from Ofsted, Stephanie Hammond, Mandy Richardson, Jan de Beel, Laura Henry Allain, Jenny Wadner, Harry Mills, Stuart Cloak, Lucy Lewin and Tamsin Grimmer. This is the biggest lineup we've ever had, so don't miss out on your tickets. The link is in this episode description. See you there on the 7th of March 2026.
Welcome to the Voice of Early Childhood podcast in partnership with Childcare and Teaching Jobs. I am your host, Dan Berman, and I'm excited to be joined by Karl, who is serving as an early years personal tutor across Yorkshire. And we'll be discussing Karl's role, as well as our primary topic today, supporting emotional intelligence in the early years. Welcome, Karl.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I'm so glad to be having this conversation. I love kind of not only the concept of emotional intelligence, but really deep diving into what that means at, 1 year of age, 2 year of age, 3 years of age. So tell me a little bit about your personal journey through early years. Kind of how did you get into the field to where you are now in a few minutes, and then turn into the topic.
Okay, so effectively, when I left school, I didn't really have a plan. I always liked the idea of working with children in some capacity, but I never really sort of knew how to pursue that. And there's a stigma attached to working with children. So I effectively found that when I was 16, I then went into a pathway that a lot of my friends were going into. So a lot of the lads that I went to school with were doing courses in mechanics and things like that, and I ended up going into electrical installation. So I signed up to do a level 2 qualification as an electrician, basically, and I did that for the first year. I gained my level 2 qualification, and then I started my level 3 qualification in the September, and I think it got to about November, and I just thought, it's not me. I can do it, but it's not sort of where my heart lies. So I effectively dropped out with no plan in sight, and then I was working for a well-known bakery chain, doing lots of very early morning shifts, making sandwiches, baking baguettes, all sorts of different things like that. And then I started to explore career pathways again. I was in the build-up to turning 18, and I stumbled across, I think it was my partner who pointed out there was a course advertised, I think it was on a poster in the local library, for an introduction to childcare course. So it was a 2-day course. I think it was 9 till 3 each day. And it taught you through different pathways within the early year sector, level 2s, level 3s, and what different sort of options were available. So I decided, let's go to that. So I contacted the organisers, and I found myself sat in a conference room at the library, literally the following Monday. And I loved it. So I did the 2 days, and they did a range of activities. So they had some baby dolls and like a nappy station. We learned to make Play-Doh, and we just learned some basics around what it entailed to work in a nursery, from the personal care routines to obviously the activity planning and what sort of goes behind the activity. So actually unpicking when you make Play-Doh with children, for example. It's not just making Play-Doh with children and sitting and playing with it, but actually as they interact with that resource, what is it that's happening and stuff like that. So I just found it really interesting, and I came away completely inspired. So I lined myself up a nursery that I originally intended to just go and volunteer at from the following January. And I think I'd worked for her for, it wasn't long, it's a couple of weeks, just doing some voluntary work before Christmas, because I was meant to start in January. And she said, when you come to me in January, rather than volunteer, I'd like you to come work for me. So she gave me a job almost straight away, and I'd probably only been in there sort of doing the odd Friday here and there as a volunteer for about 2 or 3 weeks. And she was like, I can't like have you in and not pay you. So I would like to take you on for, I think it's 20 hours a week to come and work with me, which was lovely. And then at the same time, I managed to prop myself up financially because I went to work in an out of school club as well. At a local primary school. So I did the before and after wraparound care. So I was working like 7:30 till 9 a.m. in the morning, 3 till 6. And then I was doing sort of the middle of the day in a nursery. So I was able to like do a full day's work while cycling all around on my bike to be in different locations to be able to work each day. Well, that meant I was able to practice with children effectively from like babies through to 11 years of age in a wide range of different contexts, planning activities right across the board. And just absolutely loved it. Then came the opportunity to do I did my level 2 to start with, qualification, and then came the opportunity to do my level 3 to be able to obviously be classed as being qualified and whatnot. So I went and did my level 3 qualification probably about a year in. And again, I absolutely loved that. Got through that sort of in 12 months. I won an award along the way. So I was North Yorkshire County Council's Apprentice of the Year, which was really nice to just be recognised for the work that I was doing. And I found that actually when I finished my level 3 qualification, I wasn't done like straight away. I knew that I'd really enjoyed the learning side and I wanted to know more. So I finished my level 3, I think it was July, and I started a degree in September, and I went and did my level 4, 5, and 6. Sort of straight away, I decided there was no point in taking a break from learning. There was still more I needed, like I just felt I needed to know. So by the time I got to the end of that, within sort of my first 6 years in childcare, I'd worked from level 2 all the way through to getting my BA honours degree, sort of all in sync, and sort of was never out of the classroom. But yeah, that opened up lots of different opportunities. So work progressed from sort of doing wraparound care just in the out of school club I worked in. I ended up running the out of school club for a number of years. So I arranged everything from obviously pickups of children from school right through to meals, activities, and all the different coordination that came into doing that. I became a special educational needs coordinator, just sort of because it was something I always had an interest in, and there was an opening for that within the organisation I was working in. So it was a case of like, could you cover this in the interim while we find somebody to do it? And then we had the discussion about 3 or 4 months in of actually this works really well. Why don't you just carry on doing it? So I sort of became special educational needs coordinator by accident, really, just because I was keen to, for any meetings and things like that I could cover, was keen to just get stuck in and sort of learn on the job, really. And then I relocated from Scarborough, where I was at the time, to York. And yeah, when I came to York, I became deputy manager of a children's nursery, which was a startup at the time. So it's a purpose-built sort of £1.5 million facility. And yeah, the first of its kind around here, 110 children. And I jumped straight in as deputy manager there, and did that, I think, for 3.5 years before going into teaching. Where I decided, I got about 3 years in, and I wanted to learn more effectively, but I'd really developed an interest working with students that came into our nursery. So we got obviously a lot of apprenticeship students and college students coming in on placement. So I would be their sort of like in-setting mentor. I would sign all their paperwork and whatnot. And I just found that side of things really interesting. So I signed up to do my PGCE. And relocated work-wise to go work at a local college here. And I was employed as an early years assessor, and they put me through my PGCE qualification at the same time as sort of working. So I was able to teach and gain my qualification at the same time. And then I went back into nurseries just after my daughter was born in 2022. Just because I found logistically with childcare and everything like that, that it's something that I could condense my hours. So I've been doing longer days. So I've been working like 7:15 to 6:15, effectively 4 days a week. But it enabled me to not do 5 days a week, and it enabled me to have a day off during the week as well, where I could obviously spend time with my daughter, which I still do to this day. So we have every Wednesday together. She goes to school next year. And I've just took the leap now to go back into teaching, hence the personal tutor role. Now the time sort of feels right to sort of go full guns and really give that a go now.
I appreciate so much of your story, from learning as you go and recognizing, the professionalism of
Yeah.
things, to the work-life balance aspect of the role, where you've found this kind of, it's not easy, obviously,
Yeah, no,
but
absolutely.
this balance for yourself. When you had that opportunity, because now you've served more or less infants through adults, was there a moment, or a classroom or a year, that crystallized that you prefer the early years kind of space? Is it more the development learning aspect of it? Is it the engagement with the children? What is it about early years and early education that drew you over, some of these other things that have still taken some of your time?
I found that when I went into nurseries, I really enjoyed, I guess, the key worker side, especially when I began. So being able to obviously take on a group of children, and plan for their learning and development, and being able to understand, like, I think I learned really early on in my level 3 qualification that, for example, if you're planning a maths activity for a child and you're looking at your early years foundation stage and your 7 areas of learning, that a well-planned activity doesn't have to just meet maths, for example. Because if you're doing a maths activity with children, but you're asking them lots of questions throughout, or some of the different things in which you're doing, obviously, then there's different areas that become covered in that. So you might be covering some personal, social, emotional development. You might be covering some communication and language. You're covering some maths. So I really learned to, like, I don't know, really unpick what I was doing. Every like little activity that I was able to put on, what was the sort of full holistic benefits on the children that I was working with, and there was so much more to it than just teaching them to count to 10. But for every question I asked, and like I say, from a personal and emotional standpoint, a child effectively for me has to be settled to be able to work with. So when you look at your prime areas of your communication, language, physical development, and personal, social, emotional development, I think your personal, social, and emotional development is the most important, because if a child hasn't got that foundation to be in nursery and be settled and be happy, how do you work with them to teach them anything effectively if that's not there? So I think, yeah, I had like a really sort of early understanding of being able to, yeah, effectively put a foundation in place to support the children. And it was more than just the day-to-day runnings of the nursery or navigating through different situations or planning activities. But I guess there was a broader understanding of the developmental needs being there and where I felt I could contribute to that.
I love that term that you use, foundation, because it's so strong in terms of, as you're mentioning, you can't get the academic learning if you're not settled, the word you use, which I also
Yeah,
really
yeah,
appreciate.
literally. Like I say, if a child comes in and they're really unsettled, and obviously attachment from parents can be really difficult in them first few weeks, but effectively, I always think that when you've got them sessions early on, where do you cut off sometimes? Effectively, if a child's really upset and they come for a settling in session and they spend the bulk of the hour or the 2 hours that they're in your setting really unsettled, at that point, I find it be easier to stop almost and reevaluate sort of what's happened in that time. Um, Ask a few more questions with the parents and then bring them in fresh and effectively try again. Because I worry that if you sort of overdo that and you sort of push too hard to settle them, it can push things the other way. Like, and obviously then the child develops this unhealthy relationship with nursery as such, where they continually, every morning they come to your door and the last thing they want to do is come inside, and you're the one that's obviously effectively then trying to sort of force the agenda to settle them. So I like it being sort of a much more sort of natural process where you're able to work with them, and if after 45 minutes of a settling in session they're absolutely distraught for whatever reason, bringing the parents back in and effectively trying to put a plan in place to start again effectively, to ease them in gradually, whether that be more settling in sessions where the parents stay or whatnot, but trying to individualize that process for each and every child. Like you say, to really build that foundation for them. And effectively, I find that everything that we should, in my head anyway, everything that we should be doing with children should be meeting them where they're at on arrival. So every time a brand new child comes to us and you do that initial settling session and whatnot, then you ask parents questions around their interests and everything like that. That's our point to freeze what we're doing, read that paperwork. So if you've got 15 children coming in brand new in September, how do you sort of combine all that paperwork to effectively develop areas for your children, for example? So how do your areas in your rooms represent them children's specific interests so that that setting becomes interesting to them? It meets all of their needs effectively, and we're able to sort of tailor what we're doing then to them, but know that actually 50% of the issue is hopefully solved by making sure that the environment and everything that's there is right for that individual child.
Yeah, it's a great point that meeting children where they're at is music to my ears, that phrase. Meeting them where they're at isn't just when they arrive, though that is a key touchstone moment. You can check their body language. You can kind of get a sense if they're really sleepy or if they're coming into the day really excited. You want to keep that excitement up. If they're coming in a little bit down, you have the capacity for change or adaptation. But what you're mentioning, that just creating the space and modifying that space throughout the year to meet the interests of the children, to meet their needs. Because if they're interested in something, they're more likely to engage in it. That's a real great point to make sure that if you're in the classroom, constantly being aware not only of your children's interests, but where they are spending their time. Is it drifting to one area or another? When we're talking about emotional intelligence, our concept for today, how would you define that in an early year specific setting?
I think for me, when you're looking at children's emotions, is always giving recognition to what that emotion is. So, for example, if a child's upset, never telling a child that you're okay. Effectively, it's looking at the terminology in which we use and commentate sort of along the way. So you can let them know that, like, it's okay. I can see that you're a little bit upset. But here's what we're effectively going to do about that, or here's what we can do sort of in the interim, praising them as they go. So as they continue to sort of engage in little things with you, whether that's sitting on your knee and they're sniffling a little bit and you're reading a story and they're still like a little bit upset, just taking little breaks throughout what we're doing and encouraging, you're doing really well. And like, just, giving them little prompts to make sure that every step of the way, for every sort of bit of emotion that they show, that it shows that you're aware of that. You're not trying to tell them, look, everything's fine, just stop crying. I've seen that done before. When I first started working in nurseries, I was horrified to meet. There was an apprentice at the time who effectively told the child that they were doing her head in, effectively, and how fast that I'd flown over to the person in charge to be able to say, then that's not acceptable. And obviously, I'm here to learn, but part of what we're doing is also learning from the amazing practitioners around us to look at, like, the way in which they handle situations. And it's like, I don't want to learn that. Like, that's not what I'm here for. That's not how children should be spoken to. So being able to really make sure that, I guess, all elements of practice, every setting has something that they're sort of striving for. They have an ethos, they have an approach that they might follow, for example. So it's making sure that within our journey through emotional intelligence that we're able to ultimately be everything that we say we are. We're able to tailor our practice, whether it's a soft and gentle approach, like an approach like Steiner, for example, that the way in which we interact with children becomes consistent. And we have we've always referred to in my setting as like courageous conversations along the way. So if you do hear another practitioner, for example, tell a child that they're okay, that we pick them up on little things like that and say, like, talk me through that situation. Like, what happened? What is it that you'd sort of said to them, and then sort of talking them through like phrasing that we maybe could have used, and working together sort of in that manner, really.
Yeah, as colleagues, it's important we, especially adults who are more, professionals, you take a step back if you're not their supervisor. You don't want to say this or that. But if you see another teacher, out on the playground or in a classroom doing something that you just, it hits your gut, or your mind tells you that that is not right. Absolutely giving them positive guidance to, we're adults, we all have bad days. Sometimes, it could have been that apprentice, that woman, she was just at her limit before she even walked in the door. And sometimes emotional intelligence in terms of the early years is so wonderful because it helps balance us as adults from what's happening in our day. If we can check that at the door and reset and always be there for the children's number one needs, that stuff it's happening in the world, it won't go away, but you literally can check it at the door to a degree. And if you have different handshakes with each kid, or you have a routine, and as you were saying, consistency, so important, especially for those children who have some emotional instability or immaturity, having that consistency from a trusted adult, who's there for them to meet their needs, can go so far in the process. Have you seen children in your care that really came in emotionally, I would say emotionally fragile, and made that 180 just through consistency and nurturing?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I think that's, like I say, the concept of meeting children where they're at. Sometimes that when a child comes to you, they're on a bit of a life journey, as it may be. I've had children that are literally there, maybe starting new with your setting because parents' relationships broken down, and one of the parents has effectively landed in your area where your nursery is, and they just sign the child up because they need that little bit of space to be able to work or whatnot. So child lands in your nursery, but they're going through a lot at home, maybe have just started living between two homes and things like that. We're that sort of first port of call that has to effectively not only navigate that situation on a day-to-day basis, but I've always used the terminology of like, with the parents, we're not just here for your children, but we're here for you as well. So how can I support them? I might be the, other than like colleagues at work, might be the only other person that they speak to in a day. So as their child's key person, how can I, one, ensure that they're supported, know that they've got someone to talk to, point them in the direction of different services if they're struggling, but know that as a nursery, we're there for them as well. We're not there to give them negative feedback all the time and say, oh, he or she's been really unsettled today and it's because of the situation you've got going on at home. It's nothing of the like. It's more to help them navigate through that situation from like we've got so many staff in nurseries that are parents and things like that have got so much experience with guiding them through, I don't know, how to establish healthy bedtime routines and things like that at home. There may be things that they're just, because they're now in the one parent setup, they're really struggling with that child. Hence the child then comes to us really tired on a morning, and then we sort of then have to navigate through that sort of situation. So I think, I've dealt with some really interesting, complex situations. I've had situations where, for example, I had a child that had an older sibling that had very many like complex disabilities, cerebral palsy, and a few other things alongside. So this particular child was acting up behaviourally, but it was more because I think from further investigation, like attention, obviously parents' time was taken up a lot at home with the needs of the older sibling. So again, it was how can we sort of be able to make time to listen to and understand their feelings and to help navigate that little journey for them. And stories are really good at doing that, like being able to, we've always operated on like a book of the week. So a book becomes our theme for the week, but able to choose stories around some of the key things that they're maybe struggling with. And again, there may be a few children that we can pitch a particular book at. I've used books from, there's a book called Hands Are Not for Hitting, right through to the naughty bus story, for example. So being able to navigate some of them like complex situations through stories to help children sort of really understand the feelings that they're dealing with. Other ones is when a child, for example, becomes a sibling. I've had many children that have acted up because mum's just had a baby, and again, there's so much going on at home, but able to use books like there's a Julia Donaldson story. I think there's a house inside my tummy, for example, that talks them a little bit through the process of the pregnancy and sort of what's to come and stuff like that. So being able to try and counter them situations with learning beforehand, so that we're doing sort of, I guess, pre and post learning to help them understand the full extent of the journey from what's going to happen. So ultimately they see what does happen, and then how we can do that aftercare and support after. So for me, there's so much more, I guess, from like a pastoral standpoint that comes into our role. That again, we're not just there for activities, but there's many more sort of complex situations. But again, consistency is the word that always springs to mind with me in them instances. And how, for example, if I'm off every Wednesday, how do I hand over key information that's happened, for example, on Tuesday, and when I'm then going to be off on Wednesday and away from the setting, someone different might be there, sort of port of call for that day. How do I arm them with all the information that they need? Any sort of key techniques and approaches that have maybe been working, any key language that we want to use with that child. How we make sure we've got that sort of clear and consistent handover, so that consistency in practice continues to that high level that we're sort of striving for, that's maybe working for that child. Because the last thing I want is I then go off on Wednesday and little Johnny has a really unsettled day because you're not there to sort of help and support and guide.
Yeah, you brought up so many points that, popcorn different ideas in my head. One, I wanted to circle back in terms of the sibling example you were giving, because I wanted to ask you about working directly with children with special needs and kind of that unique setting for emotional intelligence and difference. But before we go to that for one moment, I wanted to stay with that child who mentioned it's likely they're lacking in attention, and that tends to be a big reason for acting out or difficulties in emotional intelligence. And it parallels with those children that you think of as the angels, the really easy ones that you don't spend as much time with. It's really important to also check in on them and give them that time so that you don't create this cycle of lack of attention where they start acting out because they see that's the way to get positive or negative attention. They'll do whatever it takes to do that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we want to make sure we're reinforcing, quote unquote, positive. We know what our positive childhood experience is, and we want to continue to reinforce those opportunities as well. So let's cycle back to children with special needs as we start to close up here in terms of emotional intelligence. Do you find that working in those settings, you reset your expectations for emotional intelligence, or is it still meeting each individual child where they're at and just recognizing that might also come with, a physical disability or something else happening?
Yeah, that's it for me. Again, it's we make the decision sometimes, like we've been contacted by the council before, where they have a family of a child that's got X, Y, or Z, whatever that condition may be. And generally, we'll bring the child in with the family. We'll meet with them and we'll learn a little bit about the child. We'll learn sort of needs of the parents. Quite often you get professionals come along. So it might be anyone from a health visitor to like portage or whatnot will come and attend with the child. And again, it's trying to make sure that ultimately, before we even make that decision to take a child on that has got sort of highly complex needs, that we feel well equipped to be able to do that. So it's trying to make a decision that reflects, the facilities that we have, the expertise that we have available to be able to give that child the best sort of possible experience. We've had, like I say, children with cerebral palsy, wheelchairs, things like that in that we felt really comfortable. We had children with complex feeding needs. So I've actually had 2 in the last 12 months with sort of gastronomy buttons fitted where they're sort of tube fed into their stomachs. So again, it's making sure that for me that it's not that sort of thing that defines them. I don't want the rest of the children to know them as the child with the button in the tummy sort of thing, or the child that gets fed differently. But yeah, how can we make sure that, for example, meal times when he's fed through his tummy, that he's still able to sit with the rest of the children and have that meal time with everyone else? So we do that sort of as much as we can. So he would have all of his feeds at the dinner table, and we were able to just sort of hook up under the table, and using a syringe sort of next to him, we're able to just feed him gradually. But he was able to eat sort of at the same time as well, to be able to join in, so that it meant that that situation was sort of no different to the rest of the children, other than the fact that he was sort of top up fed alongside.
And that modification, sorry to cut you off, that modification allows, when you're saying he's not known to the other children as, Billy with the button, but also you're not, as the staff and the teachers, only, you're concerned for the feeding aspect. It's crucial, but it's not the only thing that Billy is getting through the day. Billy's, needs as a child learning are all there as well. So it's really important for other children to recognize, and also for that individual child to be.
Yeah, and again, when we circle back to activities, for example, how can, for example, if a child's got cerebral palsy and there's massive sensory needs there, how can we adapt our activity spaces so that they're still able to do things? They're still able to, I don't know, make gloop with us. They're still able to access the garden, and they're still able to have an experience, albeit we know it'll be different. But how can we adapt our setting so that they're still able to take part in the activities that the other children are? And how can we put different levels on activities? So effectively, we can strip back elements of an activity, for example, so they can still do sort of more or less the same thing, even if we have to have adaptations in place for them to be able to do that. We can always go sort of as close to the original as we can, or as close to the intended outcome even as we can, even if we have to modify what the activity is, so that from a learning outcome standpoint, they can still obviously take part in that activity, I guess, to the best of our ability. So that, again, they're not just there to sort of be medically supported through the day, but that they're still there to gain a learning experience out of that day. So I guess, my main sort of outcome and objective for every child with any special educational need or disability that we take in is still making sure that as a learning environment and a learning provider, I can still provide a learning experience for that child within a mainstream private day nursery, which sometimes you have to make that difficult decision that there's maybe more needed. So we had recommendations, for example, in one setting from the council of you would need a hoist and things like to be able to support the child's needs. But actually, there's a primary school 5 minutes down the road with a special educational needs facility on the side that had that equipment. So we were able to appeal instead. So actually, they'd already been denied a place at that particular school, but we were able to work with all the specialists involved to support that appeal, which then ultimately got the child a place at the facility that we felt was more of a better fit for them than we could be.
Yeah, I so appreciate so much of what you've brought, not only to this podcast, which about different ideas and concepts, but to the field as a whole. Your journey from falling into this, more or less, and having a wonderful mentor / supervisor who would not take your free hours and free service, to really being there as a mentor for other educators, for the field as a whole, and staying 1 foot, 2 feet, all the feet into making sure that children's needs are met in a classroom. I so appreciate, I tip the cap I'm not wearing right now to you. As we close, I think we covered a few real strong key points: meeting children where they're at, creating that foundation of consistency, making sure that as the adult, you're constantly modifying and being aware and adaptable. Are there any other major takeaways in terms of emotional intelligence in the early years, specifically that, if you have somebody leaving this podcast, you just want them to take one thing away?
Yeah, no, like I say, for me, the main takeaway point is how we always sort of validate the children's feelings. So it's always making sure that their voice is heard every step of the way. And even if a child's not verbally, like I say, giving that cue that they're not okay, just that cry or whatever sound it is that they make or face that they pull can be a really good indicator that things are not okay. And like I say, for us to tell a child that you're okay, it's not the way of the world, really. I think, yeah, we have to really sort of validate them feelings and be able to sort of support them to navigate through that. But with an element of honesty as well. So like when we'll sit down, for example, we do morning group time and we sing our hello song. So we sing hello to each of the children, and then we'll, at the end of it, it says, like, after you've sang 3 names, it says, "And how are you today?" And we'll ask each of the children how they are that morning, for example. And if a child's told us that they're feeling a little bit sad, for example, at 9 a.m., and then we reconvene at 12 o'clock after lunch and we'll say hello to everyone at that point, being able to look at that journey from, so you were sad this morning, now you're telling me that you're happy. Sort of what's happened this morning to sort of make you happy, and really, again, being able to show how their interests or an activity that they've had the privilege of taking part in, for example, has sort of shaped their morning, and it's effectively shaped their journey from being really upset through to happiness that they've then found 3 hours later, and sort of what that journey looked like. And I think that becomes then ultimately, for me, it's a celebration of our work. It's a celebration of the activities that you've been able to put on, the questions that you've asked to help put them children at ease. And all because we took that time. We didn't tell them that they were okay and brushed them off, but we worked with them, and we took them on a journey throughout the morning to the point where then they became settled. So I think, yeah, I guess the main take home would be think before we speak. Don't just brush them off straight away and because there's lots going on and tell them that they're fine and then go and do something else. But even if it takes you 3 seconds to get out that answer, to actually think about what it is we're going to say and how we might navigate this next situation, and sometimes actually stop what we're doing and think, actually, that can wait 5 minutes. I need to deal with this now, and prioritize those that need us the most.
That's brilliant, Karl. Thank you so much for joining us on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Get some more information, Karl has written an article that will be published alongside this podcast on the Voice of Early Childhood's website. And if you want more different podcasts from this series, check out the Male Childcare and Teaching Jobs link in the episode description here at the bottom as well. I wish you the best, Karl, and I thank you again for your time. And thank you to all of those listening and watching. Have a good day.